The information in this video is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional educational advice. The American education system is incredibly diverse, and the suitability of any particular school, charter, public, or otherwise, depends on a multitude of factors specific to a child, a family, and a community. We strongly encourage you to conduct your own thorough research and consult with educational professionals before making any decisions for your family. This presentation aims to provide a neutral, fact-based overview to empower your own decision-making process, not to replace it. Imagine two sisters, Maya and Chloe. They're identical twins, living in the same house with the same loving parents in a typical American suburb. But when they turn 5, their parents make a choice. Maya goes to the local public elementary school, the same one her dad went to. Chloe, after her parents win a lottery, gets a spot at the brand new Innovation Academy, a charter school that just opened a mile down the road. For the next 13 years, their paths diverge. By the time they graduate high school, one is a valedictorian with a full-ride scholarship to a top engineering program. The other is struggling with basic algebra and has no clear plan for the future. The question is, which twin is which? The answer is what has turned the American education landscape into a battlefield. Depending on who you ask, the charter school is either the hero of that story, the engine of innovation that saved Chloe, or the villain that drained resources from the public school, leaving Maya behind. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a real-life, high-stakes dilemma being faced by millions of parents right now. And if you're one of them, you're probably drowning in a sea of confusing, contradictory information. You hear words like school choice, accountability, privatization, and teacher unions. You see headlines that either praise charter schools as miracles of modern education or condemn them as corporate schemes to destroy public schooling. It's overwhelming. Feels impossible to know who to trust. This is why we're making this video. Our goal is to give you a clear, balanced, and neutral look at the entire charter school versus public school debate. We are going to cut through the political noise, the marketing slogans, and the scare tactics. We will arm you with the history, the data, and the core arguments from both sides so that you can make the best possible decision for your family. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to give you the tools to think. So let's start with the absolute basics. What are we even talking about? First, we have the traditional public school. This is the bedrock of American education, the default system for nearly 90% of students in the country. They are funded by your local, state, and federal tax dollars. They are run by a publicly elected school board, and they are required by law to accept every single child who lives within their district boundaries, regardless of academic ability, special needs, or background. It's a system built on the promise of universal access to education for all. Then we have the charter school, and this is where the confusion begins. Here is the simplest definition. A charter school is a publicly funded school that is operated independently. Think of it like a government contractor. They receive tax dollars to educate students, just like a traditional public school. But they are run by their own board of directors, which is usually a private, non-profit organization. In exchange for that public funding, they sign a contract or a charter with an authorizer, like a state agency or a local school district. This charter is a performance contract. It lays out the school's mission, its academic goals, and how it will be held accountable. The core idea is a trade-off. Charter schools receive more autonomy and freedom from many of the regulations that govern traditional public schools. In exchange, they promise better results. If they fail to meet the goals in their charter, they can be shut down. Unlike the public school down the street, their existence is not guaranteed. But to truly understand the tension and the promise of this model, you have to know where it came from. Because the idea for charter schools didn't come from a corporate boardroom or a politician's think tank. It came from inside the public education system itself. The year is 1988. The man is Albert Shanker, the formidable president of the American Federation of Teachers, the nation's second-largest teachers' union. He gave a speech that would change everything. Shanker was frustrated. He saw pockets of incredible teaching and innovation happening in public schools, but these brilliant ideas were often trapped inside a single classroom, suffocated by bureaucracy. He proposed a new kind of school, a charter school, that would be created and run by teachers themselves. These schools would act as laboratories, research and development hubs within the public system. They would be free to experiment with new teaching methods, different school day schedules, and unique curriculums. The ultimate goal wasn't to compete with traditional public schools, but to help them. The best, most successful ideas developed in these charter labs would then be shared across the entire district, lifting all students up. It was a vision of collaboration, not competition. The first charter school law was passed in Minnesota in 1991, and the first school, City Academy, opened its doors a year later. The idea caught fire. It was a rare political unicorn that appealed to both sides of the aisle. Democrats saw it as a way to create new opportunities for underserved students trapped in failing schools. Republicans saw it as a market-based solution that introduced competition and choice into a monopolistic public system. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, with strong bipartisan support from Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama, the charter school movement exploded. What started as a single school in Minnesota has now grown into a nationwide phenomenon. Today, there are over 7,800 charter schools in 45 states, educating more than 3.7 million students. That's more than the entire population of Utah, and that explosive growth has fundamentally changed the conversation. The original idea of small, teacher-led laboratories has evolved. Now we have massive nonprofit charter management organizations, or CMOs, that operate hundreds of schools across the country, some with budgets in the billions of dollars. We even have for-profit companies managing charter schools, a concept that would have been unthinkable to Albert Shanker. So how did we get here? How did a union leader's idea for collaborative innovation morph into a multi-billion-dollar industry that has parents, teachers, and politicians at war with each other? And the million-dollar question that every parent wants to know: after 30 years of this grand experiment, are charter schools actually delivering on their promise of a better education? To answer that, you have to follow the money, you have to understand the data, and you have to hear the stories from people on the front lines. The debate touches on everything from funding formulas and teacher certification to curriculum control and student discipline. It's a fight over what the future of education in America should look like. And it all starts with one of the most contentious questions of all. How are these schools funded, and is it fair? That's where we're going next. To understand the fight, you have to follow the money. And in the world of education, the money trail is less of a straight line and more of a tangled web, woven from a century of laws, local politics, and deeply held beliefs about community. Let's start with the system that's been around for generations: the traditional public school. Its funding is a bit like a three-layer cake. The biggest, most important layer comes from the local level, primarily through property taxes. This is the bedrock of American school funding, and it's also the source of its greatest inequality. Think about it. A wealthy suburban district with booming businesses and multi-million-dollar homes collects a massive amount of property tax revenue. That money flows directly into its schools, funding state-of-the-art science labs, a huge variety of AP classes, small class sizes, and top-tier teacher salaries. Now, travel just 20 miles away to a district in a former industrial town or a struggling urban neighborhood. Property values are low. Businesses may have left. The tax base is a fraction of its wealthy neighbors. As a result, its schools have less money, a lot less. They're fighting to keep the lights on, let alone fund a robotics club. The roof might be leaking, the textbooks are 20 years old, and teachers are often paid so little they have to work a second job. Two schools, both public, both in the same state, are living in entirely different worlds. And it's almost entirely because of where they're located. The zip code a child is born into can determine the quality of their education before they even learn to read. That's where the second layer of the cake comes in: state funding. The state government sees this massive inequality and tries to level the playing field. They use incredibly complex formulas to distribute their own funds, often sending more money to poorer districts to try and close the gap. It's a noble idea, but in practice, it's a political battlefield. Lobbyists, powerful districts, and political maneuvering mean these formulas are rarely as fair as they're designed to be. Some states do a better job than others, but almost nowhere does state funding completely erase the massive disparities created by local property taxes. The final and thinnest layer is federal funding. Despite what many think, the federal government contributes only about 8 to 10% of the total K-12 education budget. This money is highly targeted, usually for specific populations, like students with disabilities or students from low-income families, through programs like Title I. It's critical for those students, but it's a drop in the bucket of a school's overall budget. So that's the traditional model, a system deeply rooted in local community wealth, with state and federal governments trying, with mixed success, to patch the holes. Now enter the charter school. Charter schools turn this entire funding model on its head with a single powerful idea: the money follows the child. Here's how it works. When a student decides to leave their assigned district public school and enroll in a charter school, the public funding that the state and local government had allocated for that student, their per pupil amount, is pulled from the traditional school district and paid to the charter school instead. The money is public, but the destination changes. On the surface, charter proponents argue this is the definition of fairness. Why should money be tied to a building, they ask? Shouldn't it be tied to the student? If a family chooses a different school that they believe is a better fit for their child, their tax dollars should go with them. It creates a marketplace of options. It forces traditional public schools to compete, to innovate, and to improve or risk losing students and the funding they bring. It's an argument rooted in individual choice and market-based reform. But for traditional public school districts, this is where the math becomes brutal. They call this phenomenon the problem of stranded costs. Imagine a public elementary school with 500 students. The school has fixed costs that don't change much day to day. It has a mortgage or bond payment on the building. It has a principal, a school nurse, and counselors on salary. It has heating and electricity bills. It has a contract for the school buses. These costs are largely the same whether there are 500 students or 450. Now, let's say a new charter school opens nearby, and 50 students from that elementary school decide to enroll. The public school district now has to write a check to that charter school for the full per pupil funding of all 50 of those students. The district loses a huge chunk of its revenue, but its costs haven't gone down by nearly that much. The principal still needs to be paid. The building still needs to be heated. The buses still have to run their routes. Suddenly, the school is in a financial crisis. It's lost 10% of its budget, but maybe only 2 or 3% of its actual costs. What does it do? It can't cut the mortgage, so it cuts the things it can control. The art teacher becomes part-time. The music program is eliminated. The librarian is laid off. Class sizes for the remaining 450 students go up. This is the stranded cost nightmare. From the district's perspective, they are being financially drained, forced to do the same job, educating the vast majority of students, with significantly less money, leading to a death spiral of budget cuts and reduced services. Of course, charter advocates have a sharp rebuttal. They argue that stranded costs is just another term for an inefficient, bloated bureaucracy protecting itself. They say that if a district is losing hundreds of students, maybe it should make tough decisions. Maybe it should close an under-enrolled school building or renegotiate its bus contract. They argue the traditional system has had a monopoly for a century and has become complacent. Competition, they say, is painful but necessary medicine. Why should the 450 remaining students, or the 50 who left, be forced to prop up a system that may not be serving them well? And there's another, often overlooked twist in the charter funding story that adds a massive challenge for them. Facilities. Your local public school was likely built using a public bond, approved by voters, which is a separate pot of money specifically for buildings. Charter schools almost never have this option. In most states, they have to pay for their building rent, a mortgage, renovations, everything out of their general operating funds. The same per pupil money that's supposed to pay for teacher salaries, textbooks, and computers also has to pay the rent. It's a huge financial disadvantage, and it's why so many charter schools are located in unconventional places like former warehouses or shopping plazas. So we have two systems, both using public money, but operating under fundamentally different financial rules. One is a legacy system tied to property wealth and geographic destiny, struggling with fixed costs as students depart. The other is an entrepreneurial system built on student choice, but often scrambling to pay for the very roof over its head. It's not a simple case of one being good and the other bad. It's a collision of two different philosophies. Is education a public good, a community institution that we all support together like the fire department? Or is it a service, where public funds should empower individual families to choose the best option for their child? Fostering competition and innovation. This battle over dollars and cents is really a battle over control. And that raises an even bigger question. When you take public money, who do you answer to? Who is the boss? A publicly elected school board, accountable to every voter in the district? Or a private, self-appointed board of directors, accountable to its own charter? That question of oversight and accountability is where the real fireworks begin. Let's start with a simple universal parent experience. A problem at your child's school. Could be anything. A bullying issue that isn't being addressed. A concern about the math curriculum. A disagreement over a new disciplinary policy. Now imagine you, the parent, decide this is a big enough deal that you need to go over the principal's head. You need to appeal to the highest authority. In the world of public education, that path, while often winding and frustrating, is clearly marked. You go to the district school board. This board is a cornerstone of American democracy. Its members are your neighbors. You see their signs on lawns every couple of years. You see them in the grocery store. Most importantly, you and every other registered voter in your town or county put them in that position. They are elected officials, and their job is to represent the will of the community. Their meetings are, by law, public. There's a specific time on the agenda for public comment. You can walk up to a microphone and state your case on the record. These meetings are often broadcast on local access television. Their minutes are published online, and they are subject to Freedom of Information laws. If you want to see the district's emails about that new math curriculum, you can file a request to get them. It can be a slow, messy, bureaucratic process. You might get 3 minutes at the microphone to make a point that needs 30. The board might listen politely and then vote against you anyway. But the key is this: the power structure is transparent. If you and enough other parents are furious about the board's decision, you can organize. You can protest. You can write letters to the local paper. And when election day comes, you can vote them out. The final backstop, the ultimate accountability mechanism, is the ballot box. You, the citizen, are the boss. Now let's run the exact same scenario. But this time your child attends a charter school. You have the same problem with the new math curriculum. You've spoken to the principal, and you're not satisfied. So you decide to go to their board. But right away things feel different. Who is on this board? You probably didn't vote for them. In most cases, the board of a charter school is a private, non-profit entity. Its members are often self-appointed or selected by the other board members. They might be passionate education reformers, local business leaders, or philanthropists. They might be brilliant, dedicated people, but they are not, in the traditional sense, publicly accountable. Can you attend their board meetings? Maybe. This is where it gets murky and varies wildly from state to state. Some states mandate that charter school board meetings be open to the public, just like a traditional school board. Many others do not. They are considered the meetings of a private nonprofit, not a government body. So you might show up and find the door is closed. Can you file a Freedom of Information request for their emails? Again, it depends entirely on state law. In many places, the answer is no. The people making the ultimate decisions about your child's education, about curriculum, budgets, and policies, might be completely insulated from public pressure. They aren't facing a re-election campaign. They don't have to answer to angry voters at a town hall. So what leverage do you have as a parent? Your power isn't in your vote, it's in your feet. Your ultimate recourse is to pull your child out of the school. This is the fundamental difference in the philosophy of accountability. The traditional public school system is based on a theory of democratic accountability. The power rests with the collective, the community of voters who elect representatives to act on their behalf. The charter school system is based on a theory of market accountability. The power rests with the individual, the parent as a consumer, who can choose to take their business elsewhere. If enough customers are unhappy and leave, the school will lose funding and eventually fail. The market, in theory, weeds out the bad actors and rewards the good ones. Neither of these systems is inherently better. They are just profoundly different. Democratic accountability provides a public forum and a guaranteed voice, but it can be slow, politicized, and resistant to change. Think of a giant ship. It's hard to turn, but everyone on board can see the captain and has a say in choosing the next one. Market accountability, on the other hand, can be incredibly nimble and responsive. A charter board can see a problem, make a decision, and implement a change in a fraction of the time it would take a public district. But this speed comes at the cost of public process and transparency. It's more like a fleet of speedboats. They can turn on a dime, but if you're not happy with the one you're on, your only option is to find another boat. The fireworks really begin when these two models of oversight collide. For example, a charter school is publicly funded, but operated by a private board. What happens when that private board makes a decision that has a massive public impact? Let's say a large charter management organization decides to close a school in a low-income neighborhood with little warning, citing financial reasons. The decision is made behind closed doors by an unelected board. Suddenly, hundreds of families are left scrambling to find a new school, placing a huge, unexpected burden on the surrounding traditional public schools. The public has to deal with the consequences, but had absolutely no say in the decision. Conversely, supporters of charters will point to the paralysis that can grip public school boards. A visionary superintendent might propose a brilliant new program, longer school days, innovative teacher training, a specialized curriculum, only to see it die a slow death in committee meetings, filibustered by a single board member with a political axe to grind, or held up by union negotiations. They argue that democratic oversight can become a recipe for mediocrity, where protecting the status quo is easier than taking bold risks that could genuinely help children. In this view, the insulated nature of a charter board isn't a bug. It's a feature. It allows them to bypass the political gridlock and focus on a single mission: running an effective school. This clash raises a fundamental question about the nature of public education itself. Is a school public because it's funded by the public? Or is it public because it's governed by the public? Charter schools force us to confront that distinction. They are, in essence, a hybrid, publicly funded but privately managed. And this is where the debate gets so heated. Critics see a dangerous erosion of local democratic control over one of our most vital civic institutions. They see tax dollars being handed over to private organizations that lack transparency and are unaccountable to the communities they serve. They worry about a future where education is run by corporate-style boards, and a parent's only voice is their exit option. Proponents, however, see a necessary evolution. They see a liberation from a fossilized, one-size-fits-all bureaucracy that has failed generations of students, particularly those in underserved communities. They see the power of choice as the ultimate form of accountability, a more direct and potent tool than a vote cast every 2 or 4 years. They argue that if a school is producing fantastic results, does it really matter if its board meetings are televised? The answer to that question depends entirely on what you value more: process or results, democratic transparency or operational agility, the power of the collective vote or the power of individual choice. There is no easy answer. Both systems have produced incredible successes and spectacular failures. But this entire debate, this whole complex machinery of governance and accountability, is powered by one thing: money. Billions and billions of taxpayer dollars. And the way that money flows from your wallet, through the government, and into these schools is perhaps the most contentious, misunderstood, and explosive part of this entire story. The fight over accountability is fierce, but the fight over funding is a war. To understand this war, you have to follow the money. And in America, the money for education starts with you, the taxpayer. Whether it's from your property taxes, your state income tax, or your federal taxes, a portion of your wealth is pooled together for a single monumental purpose: to educate the next generation. For traditional public schools, this system is a complex web. Local property taxes form the bedrock, providing a direct link between a community's wealth and its school's resources. This is why you see vast disparities between a school in a wealthy suburb and one in a struggling inner city or rural area. Then the state steps in. It tries to level the playing field, distributing its own funds, often using complicated formulas to send more money to poorer districts. Finally, the federal government contributes the smallest slice, usually targeting specific needs like students with disabilities or those from low-income families through programs like Title I. All this money, local, state, and federal, is added up, and after the district takes its cut for administration, transportation, and district-wide services, the remaining amount is divided among its schools, largely based on how many students they have. This results in a per-pupil expenditure, a single powerful number that represents the annual public investment in one child's education. Let's invent a number for simplicity's sake. Say, in the hypothetical city of Franklin, the per-pupil amount is $15,000. For every child that walks through the doors of Franklin Public High, the school district accounts for $15,000 to go toward their education. Now, into this century-old model enters the charter school, and it arrives with a simple, powerful, and revolutionary idea: the money should follow the child. If a parent decides Franklin Public High isn't the right fit for their child, and instead enrolls them in the new Innovate Academy charter school down the street, the charter school movement argues that the $15,000 allocated for that child's education should go with them. It's not the school district's money, the argument goes. It's the public's investment in that specific child. The school is just the service provider. If the provider changes, the payment should too. This is the philosophical core of school choice. It turns a government allocation into a sort of educational voucher. Proponents say this creates a healthy, competitive marketplace. If the traditional public school is failing, It will lose students and funding to better performing charter schools. This financial pressure, in theory, forces the entire system to improve, to innovate, and to be more responsive to the needs of parents and students. It's a market-based solution to a public sector problem. Why should a bureaucratic system be entitled to a child's funding if it's not delivering results? This perspective is incredibly appealing to many. It's about empowerment, choice, and accountability. The money belongs to the student, not the system. It's that simple. Except it's not that simple. And for the public school district, this is where the war begins. Because when that student leaves for Innovate Academy, the public school doesn't just lose $15,000. It loses revenue, but it doesn't lose its costs at the same rate. This is the single most critical concept in the funding debate: stranded costs. Think of it like an airline. An airline has a flight from New York to Los Angeles on a 200-seat plane. Whether that plane has 200 passengers or 190 passengers, the cost of the fuel, the pilots, the flight attendants, and the airport gate fees remains almost exactly the same. The airline's costs are largely fixed, but its revenue is variable. Losing just 10 passengers can be the difference between profit and a significant loss. A public school district operates in much the same way. When a handful of students leave a school, the district can't just fire 10% of the history teacher. It can't shut off 10% of the lights or reduce the heating bill for a 70-year-old building. The school bus still has to run the same route. The principal, the school nurse, the librarian, their salaries are fixed. These are the stranded costs. The public district is left with a massive, expensive infrastructure designed to serve every child within its geographic boundaries, a legal mandate that charter schools do not have. So when a student or 10 students or 100 students leave, taking their per-pupil funding with them, the public school is left with the same bills but less money to pay them. Critics of the charter movement call this a death by 1,000 cuts. They argue it's a slow, systematic draining of resources that destabilizes the traditional public schools, harming the students who remain, who are often the most vulnerable, the most expensive to educate, and whose parents have the fewest options. From their perspective, public funds are meant to support public institutions that serve the entire public, not to subsidize a parallel, semi-private system. But the complexity doesn't stop there. We've only been talking about operating funds, the money for salaries, books, and electricity. What about the building itself? This is the battle over capital funding. Most public schools are built using public bonds, massive loans that local taxpayers agree to pay back over decades. When a charter school opens, where does it get its building? The answer is, it's complicated. In some states, charter schools get no facility funding at all. They have to use their operating dollars, the same money meant for teachers and textbooks, to pay rent on a commercial property, often a converted warehouse or storefront. This puts them at a huge financial disadvantage. In other places, the rules are friendlier. Some districts are required to provide charters with unused public school buildings for free or for as little as $1 a year. You can imagine the outrage when a community that just paid off the bonds for a neighborhood school sees it handed over to a privately run charter organization. Conversely, you can imagine the frustration of a charter school trying to serve low-income kids out of a cramped, rented basement while a fully equipped public school building sits empty a few blocks away. There is no standard, and the fight is intensely local and political. And then there's the deepest, most controversial layer of the funding war: the students themselves. Not all students cost the same to educate. A student with severe disabilities may require a dedicated aide, specialized equipment, and intensive therapies, costing the district $50,000, $60,000, or even $100,000 a year. A student who is learning English as a second language requires specialized teachers. A student from a low-income family may need free meals, counseling, and other support. Public schools are legally required to accept and serve every single one of these students, no matter the cost. The funding system tries to account for this. It provides extra weighted funding for these students. But the transfer of this weighted funding to charter schools is a minefield of debate. Critics accuse charter schools of cherry-picking students who are easier and cheaper to educate. They point to data showing that, in many areas, charters enroll a lower percentage of students with severe disabilities or English language learners than the surrounding public schools. Is this because they are actively screening students out? Or is it because the parents of the most vulnerable children are less able to navigate the complex lottery and application systems of charter schools? Proponents of charters fire back, arguing they are often better equipped to provide innovative, specialized programs, and that public districts simply use these students as a way to hold on to more funding. So you have two sides staring at the same pool of taxpayer money, with two completely irreconcilable views. One side sees a system of parental choice, where money follows the student to the best possible school, fostering competition and innovation. They see the old system as a bloated, inefficient monopoly that is failing children. The other side sees the systematic defunding of a foundational American institution. They see a parallel system that siphons away much-needed resources, leaving the public schools to educate the most challenging students with less and less money, creating a downward spiral. The fight isn't just about dollars and cents. It's a fight over two fundamentally different visions for the future of education in America. It's a battle over who controls the money, and by extension, who controls the schools. With the financial battle lines drawn so clearly, the next logical question is, who are the students caught in the middle of this financial crossfire? And more importantly, are they actually getting a better education? The data might surprise you. When we talk about education, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet or funding formulas. We're talking about a child's future, their shot at a better life. So when we ask the question, are charter schools actually better? We're asking something deeply personal and profoundly important. The stakes couldn't be higher. And for decades, the answer has been buried under an avalanche of conflicting headlines, cherry-picked data, and political spin. One day you read a story about a miracle charter school lifting kids out of poverty. The next, you see a report that they're failing students and draining public funds. So what's the truth? Let's turn down the noise and look at the evidence. The most common way we try to measure school performance is through the blunt and often controversial instrument of standardized test scores. For years, this was the central battlefield. The biggest and most cited research on this comes from Stanford University's Center for Research on Education Outcomes, or CREDO. Their studies are massive, tracking millions of students across the country over many years. Their first major report in 2009 sent a shockwave through the education world. It found that only 17% of charter schools performed significantly better than traditional public schools in math, while 37% actually performed worse. The rest were about the same. It was a huge blow to the charter movement's claim of academic superiority. But the story doesn't end there. In 2013, CREDO released a follow-up study. The picture had changed. This time, they found that 29% of charters had better math gains, and the number of underperforming charters had dropped. Then, in subsequent studies, the trend continued to improve. More recent analyses have shown that, on average, charter school students are now demonstrating stronger growth in both math and reading compared to their peers in traditional public schools. The data seemed to show a system that was learning, adapting, and improving, perhaps by closing down the worst-performing schools and replicating the successful ones. But here is where it gets incredibly complicated, and where the national average can be deeply misleading. When researchers dug into the data, they found a stark divide. The students who saw the biggest benefits from attending charter schools were students of color and students from low-income families, particularly those in urban areas. For Black and Hispanic students, the positive effects were often significant, equating to weeks or even months of additional learning per year. However, for white and Asian students, the results were often flat or in some cases even negative. It wasn't a simple case of charters are better. It was a case of some charters seemed to be dramatically better for certain groups of students in certain environments. This is a critical distinction. The debate isn't truly about the average school. It's about whether charter schools are fulfilling their original mission, to provide a better alternative for the nation's most underserved students. On that front, the test score data suggests they might be onto something. But test scores are just one snapshot in time. They don't tell us if a student is engaged, if they feel safe, or if they're being prepared for the long haul. What about other metrics, like graduation rates? Here the picture gets muddy again. Some studies, particularly those focusing on charter networks like KIPP, show significantly higher high school graduation and college enrollment rates. These are the headline-grabbing success stories. However, other, broader analyses have found that once you control for student demographics, the difference in graduation rates between charter and traditional public schools shrinks considerably, sometimes to nothing. Part of the reason for this discrepancy is a fierce debate over a practice critics call counseling out or push out. The accusation is that some charter schools, which often have strict behavioral codes, systematically push out difficult-to-teach students, those with disciplinary problems or poor academic records, just before they can negatively impact the school's test scores or graduation rates. These students then return to the local public school district, which is legally required to accept them. If this practice is widespread, it means charter schools' impressive statistics are artificially inflated because they aren't educating the most challenging student populations through to graduation. Charter advocates fire back, arguing that their high expectations and structured environments are precisely what help students succeed, and that holding students accountable for their behavior isn't push-out, it's just good education. This brings us to the most sensitive question of all. Who is actually sitting in the desks at these schools? When you look at the national demographic data, it's clear that charter schools serve a higher percentage of minority and low-income students than traditional public schools. On the surface, this looks like mission accomplished. But critics point to a different set of numbers. They point to data showing that charter schools often enroll a lower percentage of students with severe disabilities and a lower percentage of students who are English language learners compared to the surrounding public schools. These are often the most expensive and challenging students to educate. If charter schools are systematically enrolling fewer of them, it gives them a significant academic and financial advantage. This is the cream skimming argument, that charters are taking the most motivated students from the easiest to educate populations, leaving the traditional public schools to deal with the rest. The defense from the charter sector is twofold. First, they argue that these enrollment differences are often a result of self-selection. Parents who are highly motivated and engaged are more likely to seek out alternatives like charter schools. Second, they argue that many charters are specifically designed with a focused mission that may not be the right fit for every child, and that's the whole point of school choice. It's not about being a one-size-fits-all solution. This debate over demographics is not a sideshow. It's central to the entire argument. Because if the student populations aren't truly comparable, then comparing their test scores and graduation rates is like comparing apples and oranges. So how can we ever get a fair comparison? How do we isolate the impact of the school itself from all the other factors like student motivation or family support? The answer for researchers is a golden opportunity, the school lottery. Many popular charter schools have far more applicants than they have seats. By law, they have to admit students through a random lottery. This creates a perfect natural experiment. You have two groups of students who are identical in every conceivable way. They have the same demographics, the same motivation, the same level of parental engagement. After all, they all cared enough to apply. The only difference is that one group won the lottery and got into the charter school, and the other group lost and, in most cases, attended a local public school. By tracking these two groups over time, researchers can finally isolate the charter school effect. And the results of these gold standard lottery studies are often striking. Numerous studies, from Boston to Harlem to Chicago, have found that the students who won the lottery and attended a charter school had significantly better academic outcomes, higher test scores, a greater likelihood of taking advanced placement courses, and a higher chance of enrolling in college. The gains were particularly large for low-income and minority students. From a purely data-driven perspective, these lottery studies provide some of the strongest evidence in favor of high-performing charter schools. But, and with this topic there is always a but, these studies come with a massive caveat. The lotteries only happen at the most popular, oversubscribed schools. By definition, these are the charter schools that are already perceived as being successful. The results from these elite, high-demand schools can't necessarily be generalized to the thousands of other charter schools across the country that don't have waitlists. It proves that some charter schools are achieving incredible results, but it doesn't prove that the model as a whole is inherently superior. So we're left with a deeply complex picture. Averages that hide crucial details, test scores that don't tell the whole story, and demographic data that's open to wildly different interpretations. The one thing the data does tell us loud and clear is that charter school is not a monolithic category. The variation in quality between charter schools is actually wider than the variation between public schools. Some are exceptional, some are dreadful, and most are somewhere in the middle, just like public schools. This forces us to ask a different and far more important question. It's not, are charter schools better? It's why are the best charter schools so successful? What are they actually doing differently once the bell rings? We've looked at the numbers, the funding, and the students caught in the middle. But the real story, the secret sauce, isn't found in the spreadsheets. It's found inside the classroom walls. It's in the teaching methods, the longer school days, the strict discipline policies, and the unique school cultures they create. And what's happening inside some of these schools is more innovative and far more controversial than you might imagine. Let's walk through the doors of a high-performing no-excuses charter school at 7:30 in the morning. The first thing you'll notice is the energy. It's not the chaotic social energy of a typical school hallway. It's focused. Students, often called scholars, walk in single-file lines on designated tape marks on the floor. Their uniforms are immaculate. Shirts are tucked in. Shoes are polished. Their eyes are tracking the speaker. A teacher greets them not with a casual good morning, but with a call-and-response chant. "Who are we?" the teacher might shout. "We are college-bound." 100 young voices reply in unison. Inside the classroom, the structure is even more intense. Every minute is scripted. A timer is projected on the board, counting down the seconds for each activity. When a teacher asks a question, students don't just raise their hands. They might use a specific silent hand signal. To show agreement, they might wiggle their fingers. To show they're ready, they might fold their hands and place them on their desks, a posture they call slant. Sit up, listen, ask and answer questions, nod your head and track the speaker. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a non-negotiable rule. Failure to comply, even for a moment, might result in a demerit. A lost recess. A call home. The philosophy behind this, the no excuses model pioneered by networks like KIPP and Success Academy, is born from a powerful and controversial idea. That the chaos and instability that may exist in a child's home life or neighborhood must stop at the schoolhouse door. Proponents argue that for students to succeed academically, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, they need an environment of absolute consistency, predictability, and safety. By eliminating distractions and standardizing behavior, the school creates a space where 100% of a child's focus can be on learning. The goal is to build powerful habits of discipline and hard work that will serve them long after they've left the school's walls. For many parents, this is exactly what they're looking for. A safe, orderly school that promises their child will not fall through the cracks. But this is where the fierce debate ignites. Critics describe these environments as rigid, militaristic, and even soul-crushing. They argue that this relentless focus on compliance teaches obedience over critical thinking. Does a student who is never allowed to speak out of turn or walk in a crooked line learn how to innovate, to question authority, or to solve messy real-world problems? The data on discipline is also a major point of contention. Some of the most famous charter networks have suspension rates that are dramatically higher than their public school counterparts. A 2016 study found that over 1/3 of all charter schools suspended more than 10% of their student body, a rate far exceeding the national average. Defenders of the model say this is a necessary tool to protect the learning environment for the vast majority of students who follow the rules. But opponents see it as a system that pushes out difficult students, effectively weeding out those who don't fit the mold, which can artificially inflate the school's overall performance metrics. To achieve these ambitious academic goals, no excuses schools rely on another core tenet: more time. A lot more time. The typical public school day runs about 6.5 hours, for 180 days a year. Many high-performing charter schools extend that day to 8 or even 9 hours. They shorten summer vacation. They add mandatory Saturday classes. When you do the math, it's staggering. An extra hour and a half per day, over 180 days, adds up to 270 extra hours of instruction per year. That's the equivalent of 41 extra school days. By the time a student graduates after 13 years in such a system, they may have received the equivalent of 2 to 3 extra years of schooling, compared to their peers in traditional public schools. The logic is simple and compelling. More time on task leads to more learning. This extra time is dedicated to core subjects like reading and math, to tutoring for struggling students, and to enrichment activities that might otherwise be cut. For a student who is years behind grade level, this intensive, time-rich environment can be a lifeline, offering the chance to catch up and even excel. It's a key part of the charter school promise. We will do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to ensure your child succeeds. But this relentless pace comes at a cost, and that cost is often measured in burnout. For teachers, the long hours can be grueling. They arrive before sunrise and often stay late into the evening, grading papers and preparing for the next day's highly structured lessons. While some are energized by the mission-driven culture, many find it unsustainable. This leads to a phenomenon known as teacher churn. Charter schools, on average, have a higher rate of teacher turnover than traditional public schools. While new, energetic teachers are always coming in, critics question the long-term stability of a school where a significant portion of the staff leaves every few years. What message does it send to students when the adults in their lives are a constantly revolving door? And for the students themselves, the long days and high-pressure environment can be exhausting. The question becomes, is this rigorous boot camp style of education creating resilient, gritty scholars, or is it simply burning them out before they even get to college? So you have a highly structured environment and more time in the day. But how is that time actually used? This brings us to the third pillar of the charter school model, a relentless, almost obsessive focus on data. This isn't your once-a-year standardized test. This is a daily, even hourly, process of assessment and adjustment. At the end of a math lesson, for example, students might be given a 3-question quiz called an exit ticket before they're allowed to leave the room. The teacher doesn't just grade these and hand them back the next day. They analyze them that night, entering the results into a spreadsheet. They're looking for patterns. Did 70% of the class get question number 2 wrong? If so, the concept behind that question wasn't taught effectively. The next morning, the lesson plan is adjusted. The teacher will reteach that specific concept. Students who mastered it might be given a more advanced task, while those who struggled are pulled into a small group for targeted intervention. This cycle teach, assess, analyze, reteach happens over and over again. It's a powerful tool. It allows teachers to identify and fix learning gaps in near real time, ensuring that no student is left to fall behind. Proponents call this data-driven instruction, and they see it as the key to personalized learning at scale. It's a scientific approach to education, replacing guesswork with hard evidence. The criticism of this model is as predictable as it is potent. It's teaching to the test. When every lesson is guided by the results of mini-quizzes that mirror the format of the big end-of-year state test, what gets lost? Opponents argue that this laser focus on measurable outcomes in reading and math squeezes out everything else. Subjects that are harder to quantify, like art, music, social studies, and even recess, are often given less time or cut altogether. The fear is that this model creates students who are brilliant at bubbling in answers on a multiple-choice test, but who lack the creativity, curiosity, and broader knowledge base to thrive in a complex world. It raises a fundamental question about the purpose of education itself. Is it to fill a student with a specific set of testable skills, or is it to cultivate a well-rounded, inquisitive human being? These 3 pillars, a culture of high expectations and strict discipline, more instructional time and data-driven teaching, form the engine of the most acclaimed and controversial charter schools. They are not separate ideas, they are a deeply interconnected system. The strict culture creates the quiet, focused environment needed for the data-driven instruction to work. The longer school day provides the time necessary to execute the constant cycle of teaching, assessing, and reteaching. It's a machine meticulously designed and relentlessly optimized for a single output: academic achievement. The results, as measured by test scores and college acceptance rates, are often undeniable. But as this model has spread, it has forced a national conversation not just about what we teach, but how we teach, and what we're willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of success. This pursuit of success, however, comes with a cost. And the central unavoidable question is, who pays it? For every story of a charter school transforming a child's life, there's another story, a shadow narrative that asks about the students who are left behind, the teachers who burn out, and the public systems that are strained, sometimes to the breaking point. This is where the debate moves from the classroom into the community, and where the lines between innovation and disruption become incredibly blurred. Perhaps the most potent and persistent criticism leveled against the charter movement is the accusation of cream skimming or cherry picking. The idea is simple. Charter schools, either by design or by default, end up enrolling students who are already more likely to succeed. Critics argue that the very act of applying to a charter school is a filter. It requires a parent or guardian who is proactive, engaged, and has the time and resources to navigate an application process, attend information sessions, and arrange transportation. This, they say, weeds out students from the most chaotic or disadvantaged home environments, often the very students who need the most support. The argument then goes a step further. It points to data showing that, on average, charter schools often enroll a lower percentage of students with severe disabilities and English language learners compared to their neighboring district schools. These student populations are the most expensive and challenging to educate. So the charge is that charters effectively screen for motivated families and screen out the highest need students, creating an environment primed for success. The public school, in turn, is left with a higher concentration of the most difficult to teach students, making their job even harder and their test scores look even worse by comparison. It creates a feedback loop. Charters look good, public schools look bad, and more families flee the public system, exacerbating the problem. Now, charter advocates push back on this, and they push back hard. They point out that the vast majority of charter schools are required by law to accept any student who applies, using a randomized lottery system when applications exceed available seats. There is no interview, no entrance exam, no picking and choosing. They argue that if engaged parents are the ones applying, that isn't the charter school's fault. It's a symptom of a failing public system that those parents are desperate to escape. They'll say, "We don't pick our students, and their parents pick us." They also argue that the strict disciplinary codes, like those in the no excuses models, aren't designed to push kids out, but to create a safe and orderly learning environment that has been absent from their lives. If a student can't or won't meet those standards, is it the school's failure? Or a reflection of a choice made by the student and their family? This leads directly to the second major fault line in this debate: money. The lifeblood of any school is its funding, and in the United States, that funding is largely based on a per-pupil model. When a student leaves a public school to attend a charter, the money follows them. On the surface, this seems fair. The school educating the child should get the resources for that child. But public school districts argue that it's not that simple. Imagine a public school district is like an airline. It has massive fixed costs: the airport, the planes, the unionized pilots, the maintenance crews. These costs don't change much whether a flight is 100% full or 80% full. Now imagine a new, smaller airline, a charter, starts up and offers flights on the most popular routes. It doesn't own an airport. It just rents a gate. It uses newer, more efficient planes, and its pilots aren't unionized, so they're cheaper. When 20% of the passengers leave the big airline for the new one, the big airline loses 20% of its ticket revenue. But it can't just get rid of 20% of its airport, or 20% of a plane. Its fixed costs remain almost the same. It still has to fly to the less popular destinations. It still has to maintain its aging fleet. Suddenly, it's losing money on every flight, forced to cut services, which makes even more passengers leave. This, critics say, is what's happening to public school districts across the country. They lose per-pupil funding, but they don't lose their legacy costs. They still have to maintain large, half-empty school buildings. They still have pension obligations to retired teachers. They still have to provide transportation and special education services for the entire district, which are disproportionately expensive. They argue that charters are creating a financial death spiral for public education, draining away vital resources and leaving the traditional system to collapse under the weight of its own obligations that charters, by and large, do not have. Charter proponents see this differently. They see it not as a death spiral but as healthy competition. They argue that the public school monopoly has been inefficient and bloated for decades, protected from the consequences of its own failures. The financial pressure, they contend, forces the district, that big old airline, to finally become more efficient, to close under-enrolled schools, to renegotiate contracts, and to innovate in order to win students back. To them, the pain isn't a sign of destruction. It's a sign of necessary change. They ask a blunt question: should we prop up a failing system indefinitely? Or should we allow new, more effective models to flourish, even if it causes discomfort for the old guard? This tension over resources and results also plays out inside the school walls, in the lives of the teachers. The high-intensity, high-support environments of many successful charter schools often demand a level of commitment that is far beyond a standard 9-to-5 job. Teachers are often expected to be available to students and parents by phone in the evenings. They spend hours after school in data meetings, analyzing student performance and refining lesson plans. They work longer school days and longer school years. This total dedication is often cited as a key ingredient in their success. But it's also a recipe for burnout. Teacher turnover rates at charter schools are notoriously high, often double that of traditional public schools. Critics argue that this model is fundamentally unsustainable. It relies on a constant stream of young, idealistic, and often inexperienced teachers who are willing to sacrifice their personal lives for a few years before they burn out and are replaced by the next wave. This churn can be disruptive for school culture and prevent the development of a stable, veteran teaching staff. Furthermore, the vast majority of charter schools are not unionized. Supporters say this gives them the flexibility to fire ineffective teachers and reward high performers, freeing them from the rigid union contracts that can protect mediocrity in public schools. Critics say it leaves teachers with little job security, lower pay and benefits on average, and no collective power to advocate for better working conditions, leading to the very burnout that fuels the turnover crisis. This brings us to the deepest, most philosophical divide in the entire debate: the question of privatization. For many public school advocates, the charter movement is nothing less than a Trojan horse for privatizing a fundamental public good. They see a coordinated effort by wealthy philanthropists and corporations to dismantle public education and replace it with a market-based system. They point to the rise of for-profit charter management organizations, companies that are paid public tax dollars to run charter schools, as proof that the ultimate goal is not just student achievement, but financial profit. In this view, education is a civic responsibility, a cornerstone of democracy designed to serve every single child, regardless of ability or background. Subjecting it to market forces, they argue, will inevitably create a tiered system of winners and losers, undermining the very idea of education as a great equalizer. But from the other side, the argument is about results, not ideology. Charter advocates say that for too long, the system has been prioritized over the student. They ask, what does it matter if a school is run by a nonprofit or a for-profit CMO, if it is getting incredible results for children who were previously trapped in failing schools? They see the introduction of market principles like competition, choice, and accountability, not as a threat, but as a desperately needed catalyst for improvement in a stagnant public sector. To them, this isn't about profit, it's about performance. It's about breaking down a bureaucratic monopoly that has failed generations of low-income children and replacing it with a diverse ecosystem of schools that are directly accountable to the parents they serve. If a school doesn't perform, it gets shut down. That, they argue, is a kind of accountability that rarely, if ever, exists in the traditional public system. So we are left with a series of brutal interlocking questions. Is it fair to create islands of success if it contributes to the rising tide of failure in the surrounding public system? Is the burnout of teachers an acceptable price for the academic achievement of their students? And is the introduction of market competition into education a liberating force for innovation, or the beginning of the end for one of America's most foundational public institutions? The answer, perhaps unsatisfyingly, is that it depends entirely on who you ask. To proponents of school choice, competition is the bracing wind that education desperately needs. They see the traditional public school system as a monopoly, and like any monopoly, it has become inefficient, resistant to change, and often unresponsive to the needs of its customers, the students and their families. In this view, public schools are the equivalent of the old telephone company, Ma Bell. You got one phone in one color and you paid whatever they told you to pay. There was no alternative. Charter schools in this framework are the disruptive innovators. They are the scrappy startups in Silicon Valley, challenging the IBMs of the world. By introducing competition, you force the entire system to up its game. If a public school is consistently underperforming, and families now have the option to leave, that school is suddenly faced with a powerful incentive to improve. It can no longer rely on a captive audience of students zoned for its district. It has to earn their attendance. This market pressure, proponents argue, is the single most effective driver of reform. It encourages experimentation with new teaching methods, new school calendars, and specialized curricula that a large bureaucratic district might be too slow or too risk-averse to try. If a charter school's experiment succeeds, it can serve as a model for others. If it fails, it closes and the resources can be reallocated to a school that works. This is the principle of creative destruction, applied to education. The system as a whole becomes stronger, leaner, and more effective because the weakest links are pruned away. However, opponents paint a dramatically different picture. They argue that education is not a product like a smartphone or a car. It is a fundamental public good, a cornerstone of a functioning democracy, and applying the brutal logic of market competition to a public good can have devastating consequences. Their core argument is this: public schools have a legal and moral mandate to educate every single child who walks through their doors, no matter their academic ability, their behavioral challenges, or their socioeconomic background. They cannot pick and choose their students. Charter schools, while publicly funded, often do not operate under the exact same mandate. This creates an inherently uneven playing field. The fear is a process called cream skimming or cherry picking. While charters can't legally discriminate, the very act of having to apply, or requiring parental involvement for a lottery, can self-select for a more motivated and stable student population. Students with severe disabilities, those with significant behavioral issues, or those from the most chaotic home environments, the most expensive and challenging students to educate, are often disproportionately left behind in the traditional public school system. So, as students and the funding attached to them leave for charter schools, the public school is left with a higher concentration of high-need students and a shrinking budget to serve them. This is where the economic argument gets truly intense. The concept is called stranded costs. When a student leaves a public school for a charter, a large portion of their per-pupil funding from the state follows them. Say that amount is $10,000. The charter school gets that money to educate the child. But the public school's costs don't decrease by $10,000. The building still needs to be heated. The lights need to stay on. The principal and the school nurse still need to be paid. The bus route still has to run through the neighborhood. These are fixed or stranded costs. Imagine you and 3 friends are renting a 4-bedroom house. The rent is $4,000 a month, so you each pay $1,000. One day, a friend decides to move out to a new, trendier apartment building down the street. That doesn't mean the landlord suddenly reduces the rent to $3,000. No, the rent is still $4,000, but now there are only 3 of you to cover it. Your individual share just jumped to over $1,300. This is the financial squeeze that public school districts claim to be in. As more students depart for charters, the cost per remaining student in the public system skyrockets, forcing painful budget cuts. They are forced to cut art programs, music, library staff, and after-school sports, often the very programs that make a school attractive to families in the first place. This can create a vicious cycle, often called a death spiral. The budget cuts make the public school less appealing, which causes more families to leave for charters, which leads to more budget cuts. In cities with high charter school enrollment, like Detroit, Philadelphia, or New Orleans, this isn't a theoretical problem. It's a fiscal reality that has pushed districts to the brink of insolvency. They argue that they are being asked to manage the decline of their own institutions, effectively subsidizing their own competition with a shrinking pool of resources while being responsible for the most vulnerable students. But let's return to that core promise of competition, innovation, and improvement. Does the threat of losing students actually force public schools to get better? The evidence here is incredibly murky and fiercely debated. Some studies, often cited by charter advocates, have found a positive competitive effect. In these cases, the performance of public schools located near charter schools did improve, suggesting that competition did, in fact, light a fire under them. The theory is that principals and teachers, seeing their enrollment numbers at risk, adopted new strategies and worked harder to retain students. However, other studies have found the opposite, either no effect or a negative one. In these analyses, the financial strain caused by departing students and funding outweighed any potential benefits of competition. Instead of innovating, the public schools were simply forced into austerity, cutting programs and increasing class sizes, which harmed the educational experience for the students who remained. The reality is likely a mix of both, varying wildly from one district to another depending on funding formulas, local regulations, and the specific schools involved. The promise of competition is that a rising tide will lift all boats. The fear is that it will lift the charter yachts while swamping the public school life rafts, leaving the most vulnerable students behind. And this brings us to the human dimension of the market model. For a parent trying to navigate this system, the macroeconomic impact on the school district is an abstract concern. Their primary and entirely understandable focus is on their own child. If a charter school down the street offers a safe environment, a specific academic focus, and a culture of high expectations, it is a rational and loving choice for a parent to send their child there, regardless of what it means for the district's long-term financial health. They are simply trying to secure the best possible future for their kid in the present moment. For the public school teacher, however, the experience is profoundly different. They might be working in a classroom with crumbling textbooks, outdated technology, and a student population with increasingly complex needs. They watch as funding is diverted to a parallel system that they believe isn't playing by the same rules. They feel they are being asked to do the impossible, to educate the most challenging students with the fewest resources, all while being told by reformers that their failing school is the problem. It's a narrative that can feel deeply unfair and demoralizing, breeding resentment and burnout. So we have these two parallel systems, one built on the principle of a public utility designed to serve everyone, and the other on the principle of market-driven choice designed to foster innovation and accountability. But when the bell rings on Monday morning, what do those philosophical differences actually look like for the students and teachers living them every day? How do discipline, curriculum, and school culture diverge? And what does that mean for the future of American education? Let's walk through the doors of two hypothetical schools on that Monday morning. First, we enter Northwood Charter Academy. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Students walk in single-file lines on a designated stripe on the floor. Their uniforms are immaculate, shirts tucked in, shoes tied, colors consistent. In the classroom, a teacher raises her hand, and every student immediately sits up straighter, eyes forward, a practice they've drilled since the first day. This is the manifestation of the no excuses philosophy, a model popularized by many high-performing charter networks. The core principle is simple. Remove all distractions, no matter how small, to maximize learning time. A student who forgets their homework might serve detention that same day to complete it. A student who talks out of turn might receive a demerit. Accumulate enough demerits and it could mean a call home, suspension, or even expulsion. Proponents argue this creates a safe, orderly, and predictable environment where students can focus entirely on academics. They believe it teaches accountability and discipline, skills essential for college and career success. For many parents, especially in neighborhoods where local schools are perceived as chaotic or unsafe, this level of structure is a primary reason they choose a charter school. It promises a disruption-free education. Critics, however, see this environment very differently. They argue that no excuses can feel rigid, punitive, and culturally insensitive. They point to data showing that these strict policies disproportionately affect students of color and students with disabilities, who are often suspended at higher rates. The focus on compliance, they say, can stifle creativity and critical thinking, teaching students to follow rules rather than to question and innovate. Some former students and teachers describe the atmosphere as one of constant anxiety, where a minor infraction like wearing the wrong color socks could derail an entire day. They ask a fundamental question: are we teaching discipline, or are we teaching obedience? Now let's walk across town to Lincoln Public High School. The bell rings and the hallways flood with a vibrant, noisy energy. There's no single-file line. Students are clustered in groups, laughing, rushing to their lockers. The dress code is more relaxed. In the classroom, the atmosphere is less controlled. A teacher might use a call and response to get attention, but it's a negotiation of energy, not a command for silence. A student who forgets their homework might get a lower grade on the assignment, but is unlikely to face immediate, formal punishment. Discipline here is often handled through a multi-tiered system of supports. It might start with a teacher-student conversation, escalate to a guidance counselor meeting, and involve parents before formal detention or suspension is ever considered. The legal framework is different, too. Traditional public schools are bound by a complex web of local, state, and federal regulations governing student rights. The process for suspending or expelling a student is often lengthy and requires significant documentation, ensuring due process. Supporters see this as a feature, not a bug. It protects students, especially the most vulnerable, from being pushed out of the system. The focus is often on restorative justice, understanding the root cause of a behavior and repairing harm, rather than simply punishing the infraction. The goal is to keep the student in school and learning. But this approach has its own set of challenges. Teachers often report feeling unsupported, spending more time on classroom management and paperwork than on instruction. A single disruptive student can impact the learning of an entire class, and the process to address that behavior can be frustratingly slow. For parents, this can feel like a lack of accountability, where consistent misbehavior goes unaddressed, making the school feel less safe and orderly. The very protections designed to help one student can, in practice, hinder the education of 25 others. This difference in approach to discipline is often in service of what's being taught, the curriculum. At Northwood Charter, their charter agreement allows them to build their curriculum around a specific theme. Perhaps it's a STEM-focused school, where even English classes analyze scientific texts, and history classes focus on the history of technology. Or maybe it's an arts integration school, where students learn mathematical concepts through dance and music. This is the promise of charter flexibility in action. They can be nimble, adopting new educational models like project-based learning or a classical curriculum without needing approval from a massive district bureaucracy. If they want every student to learn coding starting in kindergarten, they can make it happen. This allows them to create a unique educational identity that attracts specific students and teachers who are passionate about that mission. The potential downside of this freedom is a narrowing of focus. In the drive to excel in their chosen niche and produce high test scores to ensure their charter is renewed, some charters may de-emphasize subjects that aren't on the state test. Arts, music, and even recess can be sidelined in favor of more math and reading prep. There's also the risk of pedagogical fads. An innovative curriculum that sounds great in theory might not be effective in practice, and because charters operate independently, there's less oversight to ensure quality and alignment with proven educational standards. Back at Lincoln Public, the curriculum is a different beast entirely. It's guided by state standards, often based on frameworks like the Common Core. A student at Lincoln is learning roughly the same algebra and American history as a student in any other public high school across the state. This standardization is designed to ensure equity. It provides a baseline of knowledge that all students are expected to master, regardless of which public school they attend. This consistency is crucial for a mobile population. A student who moves from one district to another can, in theory, pick up right where they left off. Public schools also tend to offer a broader, more comprehensive range of courses and extracurriculars, from auto shop and culinary arts to a dozen different sports teams and a fully equipped theater program. They are designed to be all things to all people. This comprehensive approach, however, can make public schools feel like a massive ship that's incredibly slow to turn. Adopting a new curriculum can take years of committee meetings and pilot programs. A brilliant, innovative teacher at Lincoln might be constrained by a district-mandated textbook or pacing guide, limiting their ability to tailor lessons to their students' interests. The one-size-fits-all model, while equitable in theory, can fail to engage the student who would have thrived in a more specialized environment. It can feel standardized to the point of being impersonal. Finally, these differences in discipline and curriculum culminate in the most intangible but powerful element: school culture. At Northwood Charter, the culture is intentionally and intensely cultivated. It begins before the first day of school, with home visits and summer orientations where students and parents learn the school's values, chants, and expectations. The walls are covered in college pennants and posters with motivational slogans. Every morning might start with a school-wide huddle that feels part pep rally, part community meeting. This creates a powerful, unified identity. Students and staff share a common language and a common goal, often expressed as climbing the mountain to college. For many, this strong sense of mission and belonging is transformative, creating a surrogate family that provides immense support. But for some, this powerful culture can feel prescriptive, even exclusionary. If a student or family doesn't fully buy into the school's specific ideology, they can feel like outsiders. The very intensity that makes the culture strong can also make it brittle, leaving little room for dissent or individuality. It raises the question of whether the school is simply serving a community or creating a new one in its own image. The culture at Lincoln Public is less prescribed and more of an organic reflection of the surrounding neighborhood itself. It's a mosaic of the dozens of subcultures that walk its halls every day. The jocks, the theater kids, the robotics club members, the skaters. The walls are a chaotic mix of student-made posters for the bake sale, flyers for the football game, and official district notices. The school's identity isn't handed down from the administration. It's negotiated daily in the interactions between thousands of people. Its strength is its pluralism. It is a microcosm of democratic society, where people from different backgrounds have to learn to coexist. The weakness of this organic culture is that it can sometimes feel like no culture at all. It can lack a unifying sense of purpose. A student can easily feel anonymous, lost in a sea of faces. Without a strong, intentional culture, the default can become one of apathy or resignation. While it reflects the diversity of the community, it also reflects its divisions and problems, which can play out in the hallways and classrooms without a strong, countervailing school mission to guide students. So we have two distinct models, two different daily realities, one built on structure, specificity, and a powerful manufactured culture, the other on breadth, inclusivity, and a culture that reflects the messy reality of the community it serves. These aren't just minor differences in educational strategy. They represent a fundamental fork in the road, a debate about what the purpose of school truly is. Is it to mold students into a specific ideal of success, or to provide a space where they can discover their own? This question of purpose gets to the very heart of the entire debate. It's not just about funding formulas or teacher contracts. It's a philosophical collision. On one side, you have the argument for education as a public good, a foundational pillar of democracy. The traditional public school system was built on this ideal, a common ground where children from all walks of life come together. It's designed to be a great equalizer, the bedrock of a shared civic identity. Its mission is universal, to serve every child who walks through its doors, regardless of ability, background, or ambition. In this model, the school is a microcosm of society itself. Its success is measured not just by the heights its top students reach, but by its ability to lift the floor for its most vulnerable. The goal isn't necessarily to create the perfect engineer or the perfect artist, but to create a well-rounded citizen, equipped with a broad base of knowledge and the social skills to navigate a diverse world. It's a system built on the principle of inclusion, sometimes at the expense of specialization. On the other side, you have the argument for education as a marketplace of innovation and choice. The charter school movement was born from the belief that a one-size-fits-all approach was failing too many children. This philosophy sees education not as a single monolithic institution, but as a diverse ecosystem of specialized providers. Each school can have its own unique mission, its own pedagogical approach, its own definition of success. One might be a no-excuses academy focused on rigorous discipline and college prep. Another might be a project-based learning environment that fosters creativity and collaboration. A third might be a STEM-focused school designed to pipeline students directly into tech careers. In this model, parents are consumers, empowered to find the perfect fit for their child. The system is designed to be Darwinian. Good schools thrive and expand while failing schools are supposed to close. It's a system built on the principle of specialization, sometimes at the expense of universality. Neither of these philosophies is inherently right or wrong. They are simply different answers to that fundamental question. What is school for? This is why the debate becomes so heated. When a proponent of traditional public schools sees a charter school siphoning off high-achieving students or public funds, they don't just see competition. They see the erosion of a vital public institution, a threat to the very idea of a shared common education for all. They see a future of educational stratification, where the market sorts children into different silos, weakening the social fabric that binds us together. They worry that in the pursuit of individual choice, we lose our collective responsibility. Conversely, when a charter school advocate sees the bureaucracy and inertia of a large urban school district, they don't just see a different management style. They see a system that is failing children, trapping them in underperforming schools with no way out. They see a lack of accountability, where the needs of the system are prioritized over the needs of the individual student. To them, offering a choice isn't about undermining a public good. It's a moral imperative. It's a lifeline for families who feel abandoned by the traditional system. They argue that true equity isn't forcing every child into the same school, but ensuring every child has access to a school that actually works for them. And here is the most difficult truth. Both sides have a point. It is undeniably true that traditional public schools are a cornerstone of American democracy, and their role as a community hub and a place of common experience is invaluable. It is also undeniably true that for decades, that same system has failed entire communities, particularly low-income students and students of color, perpetuating cycles of inequality. And it's true that some of the most innovative and effective educational models in the country right now are happening inside charter schools. It is also true that the charter sector is plagued by issues of financial mismanagement, a lack of transparency, and practices that can exclude the most difficult to teach students. So where does that leave us? After digging through the funding, the test scores, the teacher debates, and the philosophical chasms, the inescapable conclusion is that the binary choice of charter schools versus public schools is a false one. It's a flawed question. It's like asking, what's better, a scalpel or a Swiss Army knife? The answer, of course, depends entirely on what you're trying to do. The conversation we should be having isn't about which system should win. It's about what each can learn from the other. What if we took the best of both worlds? What if we could infuse the public system with the autonomy, agility, and mission-driven culture of the most successful charter schools? Imagine a system where public school principals are empowered to hire the best teachers for their specific school's needs, to control their own budgets, and to innovate their curriculum without being strangled by red tape. Imagine a system that holds itself accountable not just for compliance, but for results, and has clear, transparent pathways for improving or replacing schools that consistently fail their students. At the same time, what if the charter world were held to the same standards of transparency and public accountability as traditional districts? What if we demanded that all schools receiving public money, charter or not, commit to serving all students, embracing their role as a public good rather than a private enterprise? Imagine a system where authorization and oversight are rigorous, ensuring that charter schools are not just innovative, but also equitable and financially responsible. A system where the lessons learned from successful charters are not hoarded as a competitive advantage, but are actively shared to lift up all schools in the community. This isn't a fantasy. Elements of this synthesis are already happening in cities across the country. We see public districts launching their own innovative, autonomous schools. We see charter networks partnering with districts to share best practices. We see new models of portfolio districts that manage a mix of both traditional and charter schools, focusing on performance rather than governance structure. The path forward is not to pick a side and fight until the other is vanquished. The path forward is to evolve. The ultimate goal isn't to have the best charter schools or the best public schools. It's just to have the best schools, period. Schools that are accountable to the public, responsive to the needs of their students, and committed to the foundational American promise that a child's destiny should not be determined by their zip code. The real question isn't whether one model is superior to the other. It's how we can leverage the tension between these two powerful ideas, the public good and private innovation, to build a stronger, more equitable and more dynamic educational system for every single child in America. That is the challenge and the opportunity that lies before us.